My name is Patrice Sullivan, and at 67 years old, I never expected to be standing in the rain, staring at my suitcases dumped on the sidewalk outside my son's house. After selling my home to help my family, this was my thanks. The note fluttered in the breeze, its words cutting deeper than the cold. If you want to stay here, we have the garage ready for you. I had given them everything. Now I had nothing. Before continuing my story, I would love to know where you are watching from today. Please hit that like button and subscribe if you want to hear how I turned this betrayal around. The decision to sell my home was not made lightly. After Frank passed away 3 years ago from a sudden heart attack, the 4-bedroom colonial we had shared for 35 years felt impossibly empty. Every corner held memories of our life together, from raising our son James to hosting countless holiday gatherings. The garden where Frank spent his weekends now overgrown his workshop gathering dust. I would wander from room to room talking to his ghost, my voice echoing in the stillness. James suggested I move in with his family several times before I finally considered it. "Mom, that house is too big for you to maintain alone," he would say during our Sunday phone calls. "We have the spare bedroom. Sophie would love having her grandmother around." Sophie, my 12-year-old granddaughter, was indeed the light of my life. A bright, sensitive child with her grandfather's kind eyes and curious mind. The thought of seeing her daily instead of just on holidays and occasional weekends was tempting. When property values in our neighborhood suddenly skyrocketed due to a new tech company moving in, it seemed like perfect timing. The realtor valued our home at nearly 3 times what Frank and I had paid for it all those years ago. "Think about it," Mom James said when I called him with the news. "You could move in with us and have a nice nest egg for your future. Plus, you could help Sophie with her schoolwork. You know how much she struggles with math." His wife Allison was on the extension. "We would love to have you, Patrice," she said, her voice warm but something unreadable underneath. "Family should stick together." I had always sensed a certain reservation from Allison toward me, though she was unfailingly polite. A corporate lawyer with a sleek, efficient approach to everything, she had always seemed slightly impatient with what she called my old-school ways. Still, I believed her invitation was genuine. The house sold within a week, well above asking price. After paying off the remaining mortgage and settling some medical bills from Frank's final illness, I had a substantial sum. James suggested I put most of it into a joint account with him. "For safekeeping and to help with household expenses," he explained. "Plus, we can start a college fund for Sophie." It seemed reasonable at the time. I kept $20,000 in my personal account for daily expenses and transferred the rest, nearly $200,000, into the joint account James set up. My first weeks in their home in Seattle were pleasant enough. James and Allison had a beautiful 2-story house in an upscale neighborhood. My room was smaller than I was used to, but comfortable with its own bathroom. Sophie was thrilled to have me there, often slipping into my room after school to tell me about her day or ask for help with homework. I tried to make myself useful without overstepping. I cooked dinner 3 nights a week, traditional recipes that Frank had loved. Sophie devoured them enthusiastically, but I noticed Allison mostly pushing food around her plate. "We usually eat more lean protein and vegetables," she mentioned after my 3rd pot roast dinner. "James and I are trying to watch our carbs." After that, I adjusted my cooking, though Sophie would still request my macaroni and cheese or homemade bread when her parents were working late. Tensions began to surface slowly. Allison would rearrange the kitchen after I used it silently, putting things back in their designated spots. She implemented a precise schedule for the laundry room that gave me only Tuesday mornings, despite my offers to handle everyone's laundry as I had plenty of time. "We have our systems," she explained. "It took us years to find what works for us." The implication was clear: I was disrupting those systems. James noticed nothing, or pretended not to. He worked long hours at his engineering firm, often coming home after Sophie was in bed. When I tried to discuss the growing tension with him, he brushed it off. "Mom, Allison just likes things a certain way. She'll adjust to having you here, but it takes time." Sophie became my greatest ally in the house. She would defend me when Allison made pointed comments about my clutter or the way I loaded the dishwasher. "Grandma does it better than the cleaning lady you hire," she said, once earning a sharp look from her mother. As weeks turned into months, the atmosphere grew increasingly strained. Allison began having friends over for wine, several evenings a week, which seemed code for Patrice should stay in her room. I found myself retreating more and more, eating dinner on a tray while watching television alone, rather than joining them at the dining table, where conversation died whenever I appeared. By the 6-month mark, it was clear that what had been presented as a permanent arrangement was viewed very differently by my daughter-in-law. I overheard her on the phone with someone saying, "It was supposed to be temporary just until she found her own place. Now she acts like she lives here permanently." The irony was that they had encouraged me to sell my house and never once mentioned that living with them would be temporary. In fact, they had talked about building an accessory dwelling unit in the backyard someday for me to have more privacy while still being close, clearly implying a long-term arrangement. But I had given up my home. Most of my furniture and belongings had been sold or donated in the move as there was no room for them. My independence, my space, my daily routines, all sacrificed for what I believed would be a new chapter of family togetherness. Despite the growing discomfort, I remained hopeful that things would improve. I continued to contribute $1,000 monthly to household expenses from my personal account, while the joint account sat untouched, ostensibly growing for Sophie's future and my own care needs, if they should arise. Then came the suggestion that changed everything. Mom James said one evening when Allison was at a work event, "I was thinking it might be nice for you to visit Aunt Eleanor in Florida. You always said you wanted to spend more time with her." Eleanor was my younger sister, living in a retirement community in Tampa. We spoke weekly but hadn't seen each other in person since Frank's funeral. "That would be lovely," I said, surprised by the suggestion. "Maybe around the holidays." "Actually, I was thinking sooner. Next month, perhaps. The weather will still be nice, and you could stay for a couple of weeks. I know Eleanor would love it." There was something forced in his casual tone that gave me pause. Later that night, I overheard him talking to Allison in their bedroom, their voices just audible through the heating vent. "She seemed open to it," he was saying. 2 weeks should be enough time." "It better be," Allison replied. "I can't take much more of this arrangement." Their words stung, but I told myself they just needed space. All families have adjustment periods. Perhaps some time apart would reset things, help us all appreciate each other more. So I called Eleanor, booked a flight, and began packing for what I believed would be a brief vacation, not realizing I was being deliberately sent away while other plans were set in motion behind my back. Tampa greeted me with sunshine and humid warmth, a stark contrast to Seattle's perpetual drizzle. Eleanor met me at the airport, her familiar face lined with a few more wrinkles, but her smile as bright as ever. "Patrice." She hugged me tightly. "I can't believe you're finally here. 2 whole weeks together." Eleanor's retirement community was everything. Mine was not peaceful. Welcoming, filled with people who seemed genuinely glad to see each other. Her condo was modest, but comfortable, with a small lanai overlooking a man-made lake where residents walked their dogs and chatted in the evenings. "So how is it really going with James and his wife Eleanor?" asked on my second night there as we sat drinking iced tea on her lanai. "Your emails have been suspiciously positive." I hesitated, not wanting to burden her with my concerns, but Eleanor had always been able to see right through me. "That bad, huh?" She reached over to pat my hand. "Tell me everything." And so I did. The initial welcome that cooled within weeks. Allison's growing resentment. James caught in the middle, but ultimately taking his wife's side in subtle ways. The feeling of being tolerated rather than welcomed in what was supposed to be my home too. "And they practically pushed me to come here," I finished. "Not that I'm not thrilled to see you, but there was something odd about how insistent James was." Eleanor's expression darkened. "I don't like the sound of this, Patrice. And you say most of your money is in a joint account with James. That was a mistake." "He's my son," I said defensively. "I trust him completely." "I'm sure you do, but people change when money's involved. And that wife of his sounds like a piece of work." Eleanor leaned forward. "Promise me you'll move that money into your own account when you get back." I promised to consider it, though I still couldn't bring myself to believe James would ever betray my trust. Despite our current difficulties, he was still the boy I had raised, the child who had once made me Mother's Day cards with painstaking care, who had cried in my arms after his first heartbreak, who had held my hand at his father's funeral. The first week in Florida passed pleasantly. Eleanor introduced me to her friends, took me to her water aerobics class, and drove me around to see the sights. We visited the Dolly Museum, took a boat tour to see manatees, and spent an afternoon at the beach collecting shells. For the first time since moving in with James and Allison, I felt relaxed, like I could breathe freely. I called Sophie every evening around her bedtime. Initially, she was full of stories about school and friends, but as the days passed, her responses grew shorter sometimes, even evasive. "Is everything okay at home, sweetheart?" I asked on day 5, concerned by her unusual quietness. "Yeah, I guess." Her voice was small. "Mom and Dad are arguing a lot." "About what?" A pause. "Stuff. Grown-up stuff." "I gotta go, Grandma. Mom's calling me." My calls with James were equally concerning. At first, he asked about my trip and seemed interested in my activities with Eleanor. By the second week, he barely had time to talk, always claiming to be heading into a meeting or picking up Sophie from an activity. Then came the strange call with Allison. It was unexpected. She had never called me directly before. "Patrice, I just wanted to check that you're having a good time," she said, her voice artificially bright. "James mentioned you might even want to extend your stay." "He did." This was news to me. I hadn't considered it. "Oh." A pause. "Well, if you wanted to, I'm sure Eleanor would be thrilled. And we completely understand if you need more sister time." Something in her tone made me uneasy. It was as if she was performing for an audience. I could hear movement in the background, dishes being put away perhaps. "Actually, we're making some changes here that might disrupt things for a while," she continued, her voice dropping slightly. "The contractors are coming." "Contractors? What work are you having done?" James hadn't mentioned any home improvements. "Just some. Reorganizing. Making better use of our space." Her voice became muffled, as if she had covered the phone. I heard her say, "Yes, I'm telling her to someone, presumably James." "Is James there? Can I speak with him?" "He's tied up right now." "Listen, Patrice, enjoy your vacation. Don't worry about anything here. We've got it all under control." The call ended abruptly, leaving me with a growing sense of dread. That night I couldn't sleep, Eleanor's warnings echoing in my mind. "You need to go back early," Eleanor said over breakfast the next morning after I recounted the strange conversation. "Something's not right." "I'm probably overreacting," I said, though I didn't believe it. "Patrice, I've known you my entire life. Your instincts are rarely wrong." Eleanor reached for her tablet. "Let me see if I can change your flight. The sooner you get back there and figure out what's going on, the better." After some searching, she found a flight leaving the next day, cutting my trip short by 2 days. I felt guilty about leaving Eleanor early, but she insisted. "This is about your future, your security," she said firmly. "And I don't trust that daughter-in-law of yours as far as I could throw her." I didn't tell James or Allison about the change in plans. Some instinct told me that surprise might be my only advantage in whatever situation awaited me. As the plane took off from Tampa, I looked down at the shrinking landscape, wishing I could simply stay with Eleanor in her peaceful community rather than return to the mounting tension in Seattle. The flight gave me plenty of time to think, to review the past months for signs I might have missed. Had James been planning something all along? Was Allison's initial welcome merely a ploy to get access to my money? I couldn't bear to believe it yet. Doubt crept in with each passing mile. By the time the plane touched down in Seattle, my anxiety had solidified into a hard knot in my stomach. I collected my luggage and headed for the taxi stand, steeling myself for whatever awaited me at what I had thought was my new home. The rain was coming down in sheets as the taxi pulled onto James and Allison's street. I peered through the water-streaked window, expecting to see the familiar facade of their handsome craftsman-style house. Instead, what caught my eye made my heart stop. There on the sidewalk, getting soaked in the downpour, were my suitcases, the ones I had left in my closet, and taped to the largest one was what appeared to be a note in a plastic sleeve to protect it from the rain. "Stop here," I told the driver, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. "Lady, are you sure this is the right address?" the taxi driver asked, eyeing the luggage on the sidewalk with concern. "Looks like somebody's having a bad day." I couldn't answer him. My throat had closed up at the sight of my possessions sitting there in the rain. With trembling hands, I paid the fare and asked him to wait. "Take your time," he said kindly. "I'll help you with those bags if you need to go somewhere else." I stepped out into the rain, immediately feeling it soak through my light jacket. Florida had not prepared me for Seattle's September chill. I approached my suitcases slowly, as if they might disappear if I moved too quickly. 3 bags in total, everything I had brought with me when I moved in now, packed haphazardly and abandoned. The note was secured in a Ziploc bag, taped to my largest suitcase. With numb fingers, I pulled it free and read the typewritten message. "If you want to stay here, we have the garage ready for you. Your presence in our house is affecting our marriage. Allison." Not even signed by my son. Just his wife, making it clear whose decision this had been, or at least who was willing to take responsibility for it. I stood there, rain streaming down my face, mingling with tears I didn't realize I was shedding. 67 years old, my home sold, most of my possessions gone, and now this. Evicted by my own family without warning, without discussion. The front door opened, and Allison appeared in the doorway. She wore her usual impeccable business attire, not a hair out of place. Her expression registered surprise when she saw me. "Patrice, you're back early." Her tone was flat, neither welcoming nor apologetic. She made no move to invite me in out of the rain. "What is this?" I held up the note, my voice shaking. "What have you done with my things?" "I packed everything carefully," she said, as if that was the issue. "We discussed this, Patrice. The living arrangement isn't working." "We most certainly did not discuss this." My shock was giving way to anger. "Where is James?" "Working late." Her gaze shifted slightly. "A lie." "Call him," I demanded. "Call him right now." From somewhere inside the house, I heard Sophie's voice. "Grandma? Is that Grandma?" Allison turned her head. "Stay upstairs, Sophie. This doesn't concern you." "She's my grandmother." Sophie appeared behind Allison, trying to push past. "What are you doing? Why are her suitcases outside?" "Sophie, go to your room now." Allison's voice held a warning edge I'd never heard her use with her daughter before. Sophie's face crumpled, but she stood her ground. "No, you're being mean," Dad said. "Grandma could live with us forever." "Your father says a lot of things he doesn't mean," Allison replied coldly. "Go to your room or lose your phone privileges for a month." With a last anguished look at me, Sophie turned and ran upstairs, her sobs echoing in the entryway. "May I at least come in and get out of the rain?" I asked, dignity the only thing I had left. "Or shall we continue this discussion on the sidewalk for all the neighbors to enjoy?" Allison hesitated, then stepped back grudgingly. "Fine, but just in the foyer." I stepped inside the house that had been my home for the past 6 months, suddenly feeling like a stranger. Immediately, I noticed changes. The small table where I used to leave my purse was gone. The family photos on the wall no longer included any with me in them. "Where are the rest of my things?" I asked, looking around. "In storage. A small unit. I have the key here." She reached into a drawer in the console table and pulled out a key on a tag. "The address is written down. First month is paid." The calculated coldness of it all was stunning. This hadn't been a sudden decision. This had been planned, methodically executed while I was conveniently out of the way. "I want to see my room," I said. "That's not possible." Allison blocked the stairs. "We've converted it." "Converted it?" "I've been gone for 12 days. We had the work done quickly. It's James's home office now. He needs the space to work remotely." 12 days. In 12 days, they had erased all evidence of my existence in their home, as if I had never been there at all. Where is my furniture? My keepsake's Frank's things. My voice rose despite my efforts to remain calm. Most of it is in storage. Some larger items we had to donate. She at least had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. There wasn't room for everything. Donate. They had given away my possessions, things that had survived from my life with Frank without my knowledge or consent. This is illegal, I said, a strange calm settling over me. You cannot evict me without proper notice. I have tenant rights. Allison's expression hardened. You're not a tenant, you're family, and family arrangements are different. Where is James? I asked again. I want to speak with my son. He'll be home later. He thought it would be better if he wasn't here when you got back. She crossed her arms. The garage apartment is ready if you want it. It's basic, but it has a bed and bathroom. We can discuss a more permanent arrangement later. The garage. They expected me to move from a comfortable bedroom to what was essentially an unfinished storage space above their garage with no warning, no discussion. And if I refuse? Allison's eyes were cold. Then I suggest you find a hotel. Your things will remain in storage either way. I looked at this woman, this stranger, who had married my son, who had welcomed me into her home with false smiles while plotting my removal all along. I thought of the money in the joint account with James. Money that was supposed to secure my future. Money that now seemed in jeopardy. Sophie needs to say goodbye properly, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. That's not a good idea right now. She's upset. I'll have her call you when things settle down. Behind Allison, I caught a glimpse of Sophie at the top of the stairs listening. Our eyes met briefly before she ducked out of sight. In that moment, I made a decision. This was not a battle I could win, standing in this foyer, exhausted from travel, soaked from the rain, emotionally blindsided. I needed to retreat, regroup, and consider my options. I'll go, I said quietly. But this isn't over, Allison. Not by a long shot. Her relief was palpable. I'll help you get your bags to the taxi. Don't bother. My dignity was all I had left. I managed on my own for 67 years. I can manage now. I turned and walked back into the rain, hearing the door close firmly behind me. The taxi driver was still waiting, engine running, wipers clearing the streaming windshield. Change of plans, I told him as I approached. Could you take me to the nearest decent hotel? Without comment, he loaded my bags into the trunk, while I slid into the back seat, finally allowing the tears to flow freely now that I was out of Allison's sight. As the taxi pulled away from the curb, I looked back at the house. In an upstairs window, Sophie's small face appeared, her hand pressed against the glass in farewell. I raised my own hand in response, my heart breaking at the thought of being separated from her. But beneath the heartbreak, something else was stirring. Something that felt remarkably like resolve. The hotel room was basic, but clean, a generic space with beige walls and a floral bedspread that had seen better days. It was all I could afford without knowing my financial situation. The desk clerk had looked at me with concern when I checked in, a soaking wet older woman with red-rimmed eyes and no reservation. Just for tonight, he had asked kindly. For now, I had replied, not knowing what tomorrow would bring. Once alone, I mechanically unpacked my toiletries and changed into dry clothes. Then I sat on the edge of the bed, my mind struggling to process the events of the day. The suitcases on the sidewalk. Allison's cold demeanor. Sophie's tears. The garage apartment offered as if it were a generous concession rather than a humiliating demotion. I picked up my phone and called Eleanor. Patrice, did you make it back okay? The concern in her voice broke something in me. They kicked me out, Ellie. My bags were on the sidewalk when I got there. What her shock came through clearly. Tell me everything. I recounted the scene at the house, my voice breaking several times despite my efforts to remain composed. Those ungrateful conniving. Eleanor rarely swore, but she made an exception now, calling my son and daughter-in-law names that would have shocked our mother. Where are you now? Budget hotel near their neighborhood. I don't know what to do next. You come back here, she said immediately. I've got the spare room. You can live with me. The offer was tempting. Eleanor's community was pleasant, her company comforting. But it would mean leaving Seattle, leaving Sophie. And it would mean allowing James and Allison to get away with what they had done. I appreciate that, Ellie. I really do. But I need to figure some things out first. The money, she said, reading my mind. You need to check on that joint account. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. You don't think? I think you need to call the bank first thing tomorrow. Tonight, if they have a 24-hour service line. After promising to call her back, I hung up and immediately dialed the number for our bank. It was nearly 8 o'clock, but their customer service was open until 9. After verifying my identity, I asked for the current balance on the joint account. One moment, Mrs. Sullivan. A pause that seemed to stretch for eternity. That account currently has a balance of $172.36. The room seemed to tilt. That's impossible. There should be nearly $200,000 in that account. Let me check the recent activity. More typing. There was a transfer made 5 days ago for $198,000 to another account. What account? Where did it go? I'm afraid I can't provide that information over the phone for security reasons. You would need to come into a branch with identification. 5 days ago. While I was in Florida. While I was being encouraged to extend my stay. I need to place a freeze on that account immediately, I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. I can do that for you, Mrs. Sullivan. No further withdrawals will be permitted without both account holders present at a branch with identification. Too late. Far too late. After ending the call, I sat in stunned silence. They had taken everything. My home, my possessions, my money, my granddaughter. In less than 2 weeks, they had systematically stripped me of everything that mattered. I thought back to raising James. The sleepless nights when he was colicky as an infant. Teaching him to ride a bike, bandaging scraped knees, helping with homework. The college tuition Frank and I had scraped together sometimes, working second jobs to ensure he could graduate without debt. The down payment we had given him and Allison for their first house. Had he forgotten all of that, or did he simply not care? I thought about calling him directly, but realized I couldn't trust myself to speak to him calmly. Not yet. Not until I had a plan. My phone buzzed with a text message. Sophie using her tablet since her phone was probably being monitored. Grandma, are you okay? I'm so sorry about what Mom did. Dad didn't stop her. They fought about it. I heard everything. I miss you already. My heart contracted painfully. My sweet girl caught in the middle of adult ugliness. I'm okay, sweetheart. Staying at a hotel tonight, don't worry about me. Focus on school and being good. This isn't your fault. Can I still see you, Mom? Said you moved away. Another lie. I'm still in Seattle. We'll figure something out. I love you very much. Love you too. I recorded Mom and Dad talking about getting rid of you. They didn't know. Should I send it? My breath caught. Sophie had evidence of their planning. It might be useful, but I didn't want to put her in the middle any more than she already was. Keep it safe, but don't send it now. And don't let them know you have it. We'll talk soon. I put the phone down and lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. 67 years old and effectively homeless. My life savings stolen by my own son. My relationship with my granddaughter in jeopardy. For the first time, I allowed myself to feel the full force of my anger. This wasn't just about money, though. That was serious enough. This was about betrayal of the deepest kind. This was about my son allowing his wife to throw his mother's possessions onto the street like garbage. This was about them planning, calculating, waiting for the perfect moment to discard me. As I lay there in the anonymous hotel room, watching shadows move across the ceiling, something hardened inside me. A resolve I hadn't felt since Frank died. A determination not to be a victim. I had raised James better than this. I had taught him about consequences, about responsibility, about family loyalty. Somewhere along the way, he had forgotten those lessons. It was time to remind him. By 3 a.m, I had a plan. It wasn't perfect, and it would require help, but it was a start. I would not slink away to Florida in defeat. I would not quietly accept what they had done. I would fight not just for myself, but for every parent who had given everything to their child, only to be discarded when no longer useful. I finally drifted off to sleep around 4, the first tendrils of dawn beginning to lighten the sky outside my window. Tomorrow would be a day of action. Tonight had been for grief, for anger, for decision-making. As consciousness faded, my last thought was of Sophie's message. I recorded Mom and Dad talking about getting rid of you. My granddaughter, it seemed, had inherited my sense of justice and my unwillingness to accept wrongdoing silently. There was hope in that, a small flame of possibility in the darkness that had descended upon my life. Morning arrived with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. I showered, dressed in my most professional outfit, and ate the complimentary breakfast in the hotel lobby while making a list of calls. First on my list was Marion Jenkins, a retired attorney I knew from church. Marion had specialized in elder law before her retirement and had always been kind to me during coffee hour after services. She agreed to meet me at a cafe near her home at 10 o'clock. I arrived early, nursing a cup of tea and organizing my thoughts. When Marion walked in, her familiar silver bob and brisk manner immediately put me at ease. "Patrice," she greeted me warmly before her expression turned serious. "You sounded upset on the phone. What's happened?" I laid out the entire situation, from selling my house and moving in with James and Allison to finding my suitcases on the sidewalk yesterday. I told her about the joint account now emptied and the storage unit containing what remained of my possessions. Marion's expression darkened as I spoke. By the time I finished, she was making notes on a legal pad, her mouth set in a grim line. "First things first," she said. "All business now. You have legal residency rights. They cannot simply evict you without proper notice, family or not. Second, the joint account is troubling. When was it established?" "About 6 months ago, when I sold my house. And it was always presented to you as money for your future care, correct? Not a gift to your son." "Absolutely. It was my retirement money. James suggested the joint account for convenience and to help manage household expenses." Marion nodded. "Good. That establishes intent. We can make a case for financial elder abuse, especially if the money was moved while you were away and without your knowledge or consent." The term elder abuse made me flinch. It sounded so clinical, so impersonal. This was my son we were talking about. Marion noticed my reaction. "I know this is difficult, Patrice, but we need to be clear about what's happened here. Your son and daughter-in-law have taken advantage of you both financially and emotionally." She outlined a plan of action. First, secure temporary housing. Second, document everything related to the financial transactions. Third, file a police report about the potentially fraudulent bank transfer. Fourth, send a formal letter asserting my residency rights. And finally, schedule a mediation session with James and Allison with legal representation present. "What about the garage apartment they offered?" I asked. "Should I accept that as a temporary measure?" Marion considered. "Actually, yes. It establishes that they recognize your right to housing in the property. We can use that as leverage while we address the financial issues." By noon, I had extended my stay at the hotel for 3 more days and made an appointment with the bank for that afternoon. Marion agreed to accompany me. The bank manager's face grew increasingly concerned as I explained the situation, providing documentation of the house sale and the original deposit into the joint account. "This is very troubling, Mrs. Sullivan," he said after reviewing the records. "The transfer was indeed made 5 days ago to an account at another institution." Mr. Sullivan presented the necessary identification and authority as a joint account holder. "Was there anything unusual about the transaction?" Marion asked. The manager hesitated. "I wasn't personally involved, but the notes indicate Mr. Sullivan mentioned something about an investment opportunity with a limited window. The amount was substantial enough that it required additional verification, which he provided." "An investment opportunity," I repeated, the betrayal cutting deeper. "My entire life savings." "We would like to place a formal fraud alert on Mrs. Sullivan's identity," Marion said. and we need copies of all documentation related to this account, from its opening to the most recent transaction. With the bank visit complete and the documentation secured, our next stop was the police station. Filing a report about potential financial elder abuse was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. Sitting in a sterile interview room explaining to a sympathetic but professional detective how my own son had potentially stolen my life savings felt surreal. "We see this more often than you might think," Mrs. Sullivan, the detective, said gently. "Family financial exploitation of elders is unfortunately common." I provided copies of the bank records, text messages from James, encouraging me to extend my Florida stay and a timeline of events. The detective took detailed notes and explained that they would investigate, though financial cases often took time. "The fact that it's a joint account complicates things," he explained. "But the circumstances around the transfer, especially while you were away and apparently being encouraged to stay away, are concerning." By late afternoon, Marion had drafted a formal legal notice asserting my residency rights and demanding the return of my personal property and funds. We decided that I would deliver it personally with a police escort to ensure there was no confrontation. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Marion asked as we sat in her car outside the police station. "We could have it delivered by courier." "I'm sure," I said firmly. "I want to look my son in the eye when he receives this." 2 hours later, I stood on the doorstep of what had briefly been my home, a police officer beside me, Marion, waiting in her car at the curb. My heart pounded, but my resolve remained firm. James opened the door this time. He looked tired, shadows under his eyes, suggesting sleepless nights. Good, I thought uncharitably. He should be losing sleep. His eyes widened when he saw the officer. "Mom, what's going on?" "James Sullivan," the officer asked formally. "Yes, that's me." James looked between us, confusion giving way to apprehension. "I'm Officer Michaels. I'm here to ensure the peaceful delivery of legal documents and to assist Mrs. Sullivan in accessing personal belongings if necessary." I held out the envelope Marion had prepared. "This is a formal notice asserting my legal residency rights and demanding the return of funds transferred from our joint account without my knowledge or consent. It also requests the immediate return of all my personal property currently in storage or elsewhere." James took the envelope slowly, his face draining of color. "Mom, we need to talk about this. Not like this." He glanced nervously at the officer. "We will talk," I agreed. "With our respective legal representation present. The notice includes details for a mediation session on Friday at 10 a.m. "Legal representation, a mediation session," he lowered his voice. "Mom, this is family business." "Family doesn't throw family's possessions onto the street, James. Family doesn't drain shared bank accounts while sending the other person on a conveniently timed trip." He flinched. "It wasn't like that." "Then explain it to me on Friday with your lawyer present." From inside the house, I heard Allison's voice. "James." "Who is it?" She appeared behind him, freezing when she saw me with the police officer. "Mrs. Allison Sullivan?" the officer asked. "Yes," she answered cautiously. "You're also named in these documents. Please be advised that removing or disposing of any additional property belonging to Mrs. Patrice Sullivan may result in further legal action." Allison's carefully composed expression cracked. "This is ridiculous. We offered her the garage apartment. We're not throwing her out on the street." "After you literally threw my possessions onto the street," I reminded her. "The garage apartment may be a temporary solution while we resolve these issues, but it doesn't address the financial matters or the treatment I've received." Grandma Sophie's voice came from the top of the stairs. "Is that you?" "Sophie, go to your room," Allison said sharply. Number Sophie came down the stairs, defiant. "I want to see my grandmother." She ran to me, throwing her arms around my waist. I hugged her tightly, fighting back tears. "I miss you," she whispered. "I miss you too, sweetheart," I said, stroking her hair. "But I'm not going far, I promise." Sophie looked up at her parents, her young face surprisingly fierce. "You shouldn't have done that to Grandma. It was mean and wrong." "Sophie, you don't understand adult matters," Allison began. I understand plenty, Sophie shot back. I understand you waited until Grandma was gone to pack up her room. I understand you told Dad it was the only way to save your marriage. I understand you said Grandma's money could help with your credit card debt. James looked stricken. Sophie, go upstairs now. You have a choice, I told them both. My voice steady despite the emotion churning inside me. You can return my funds and work with me to find an acceptable living arrangement, or we can proceed with formal legal action for elder abuse, fraud, and illegal eviction. Either way, I will not be silenced or dismissed. I turned to Sophie. I have to go now, sweetheart. But I'll see you soon, I promise. Can I come visit you? She asked, clinging to my hand. That's not up to me right now, but I'll be at the mediation on Friday. I looked pointedly at James and Allison. We'll work something out then. As I walked back to Marion's car, I could feel 3 pairs of eyes on me. The officer remained behind briefly to ensure there was no further conflict. I didn't look back, keeping my spine straight, and my head high despite the hurricane of emotions inside me. You did well, Marion said as I slid into her passenger seat. Now we prepare for Friday. For the first time since finding my suitcases on the sidewalk, I felt a glimmer of hope. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Friday morning arrived with a sense of reckoning. I had spent the intervening days meeting with Marion, gathering documents, and preparing for every possible scenario. I had also moved into the garage apartment, a tactical decision that Marion assured me strengthened our position without surrendering any legal rights. The space was basic, as Allison had said. A converted storage area with a bed, small bathroom, and kitchenette. No decorations, minimal furniture, clearly not intended for comfortable long-term living. But it put me close to Sophie, while keeping me physically separated from James and Allison, which was honestly a relief. The mediation was scheduled at a neutral location, a conference room in Marion's former law firm. I arrived early with Marion reviewing our talking points one last time. Remember, she counseled, stay calm no matter what. Emotional outbursts won't help your case. Let the facts speak for themselves. I nodded, though my stomach was in knots. The thought of confronting my son in this formal setting was deeply painful yet necessary. James and Allison arrived precisely at 10, accompanied by a young attorney with an expensive haircut and an air of confidence that seemed slightly forced. Sophie had been left with a neighbor, despite her protests that she wanted to attend. The mediator, a retired judge named Catherine Baxter, introduced herself and outlined the process. This is not a court proceeding, she explained. My role is to facilitate a conversation that hopefully leads to resolution. Everything said here is confidential. She invited me to speak first. Taking a deep breath, I laid out the facts as clearly and unemotionally as I could. The sale of my house at James's suggestion. The joint account established for my future care and Sophie's education. My move into their home presented as a permanent arrangement. The sudden change while I was away visiting Eleanor. The emptied bank account. The suitcases on the sidewalk. Throughout my recounting, I kept my eyes on James, searching for any sign of the son I had raised. He couldn't hold my gaze, his eyes fixed on the table, shoulders hunched. When I finished, Marion presented the documentation, bank records, text messages, the timeline of events, and Sophie's statement about overhearing discussions of getting rid of Grandma. We have recordings as well, Marion added, though we actually didn't yet. Sophie had promised to provide them, but hadn't had the opportunity. It was a strategic bluff, and I saw both James and Allison react with visible alarm. Their attorney spoke next, attempting to reframe the narrative. While my clients acknowledge that the situation was handled imperfectly, they dispute the characterization of events. This was a family arrangement that wasn't working out. The joint account was established with verbal understandings that are now in dispute. As for the living arrangements, they have provided alternative accommodation in the garage apartment. Alternative accommodation that was presented as a fait accompli after Mrs. Sullivan's possessions were removed from the house without her knowledge or consent, Marion countered. Judge Baxter turned to James and Allison. I'd like to hear directly from you. Mr. Sullivan, perhaps you could explain the transfer of funds from the joint account. James cleared his throat, still not meeting my eyes. It was always my understanding that the money was to help our family. Mom wanted to contribute. That's not true, I interjected, unable to help myself. It was my retirement fund. You suggested the joint account for convenience and security. Mrs. Sullivan, please allow your son to finish, Judge Baxter said gently. James continued, his voice strained. We've had some financial difficulties. My business investment didn't pan out as expected. There were losses that needed to be covered. What business investment? I asked, confused. James was an engineer at an established firm, not an entrepreneur. He hesitated, glancing at Allison before answering. I've been day trading, options trading specifically. It started small, just some extra income. But then there were some losses and I tried to recover them and things escalated. Gambling, Marion said flatly. You've been gambling with your mother's retirement funds. It's not gambling, James protested weakly. It's investing. With what expertise? Marion pressed. What training do you have in options trading? His silence was answer enough. And the decision to move your mother's belongings while she was away, Judge Baxter prompted. Mrs. Allison Sullivan, perhaps you could address this. Allison straightened in her chair, her composure firmly in place. It was becoming untenable, having Patrice in our home. Our marriage was suffering. Sophie was becoming too attached to her grandmother and challenging our parental authority. We needed to reclaim our family dynamic. So you waited until she was out of town, packed up her belongings, and put her suitcases on the sidewalk. Judge Baxter's tone made it clear how she viewed these actions. We provided the garage apartment, Allison insisted, and we kept her larger furniture items in storage. After donating some without her permission, Marion reminded them. The mediation continued for nearly 2 hours, the facts becoming increasingly clear. James had indeed been engaging in high-risk trading, losing substantial amounts of money. He had convinced himself that using my funds was justified since I was living with them. Allison had grown increasingly resentful of my presence, particularly my relationship with Sophie, who had begun questioning her mother's values and decisions. I'm her mother, Allison said at one point, emotion finally cracking her polished veneer. But suddenly she's comparing everything I do to her wonderful grandmother. Grandma doesn't yell. Grandma listens. Grandma makes me feel important. Do you have any idea what that's like? I hadn't realized the depth of her insecurity, how threatened she felt by my relationship with Sophie. It didn't excuse her actions, but it helped me understand them. As the session progressed, Judge Baxter skillfully drew out more revelations. James admitted to feeling trapped between his wife and mother. Allison acknowledged that the sidewalk incident had been deliberately humiliating, a product of her built-up resentment. And then came the bombshell from their attorney. My clients have concerns about their ability to repay the full amount immediately, he said carefully. The funds were invested and subsequently lost. They can offer a payment plan, but immediate full restitution would be financially devastating. The room fell silent. My life savings gone. Not just transferred, but lost in James's gambling scheme disguised as investing. In that moment, something shifted inside me. The anger and hurt remained, but now I saw my son and daughter-in-law more clearly. Not as monsters, but as deeply flawed humans who had made terrible choices. James trapped in a gambling addiction he couldn't admit to. Allison driven by insecurity and resentment, both willing to sacrifice my well-being rather than face their own problems. Here's what I propose, I said, surprising everyone, including Marion. I will not pursue criminal charges for elder abuse and fraud on the following conditions. First, I want legal ownership of the garage and apartment properly converted to a legal accessory dwelling unit at your expense, with all necessary permits and improvements to make it a proper living space. James and Allison exchanged startled glances. Second, I want a formal repayment agreement, legally binding for the full amount taken from the joint account with reasonable interest. I don't need it all at once, but I need security knowing it will be repaid. Marion slid me a note. Are you sure about this? I nodded slightly before continuing. Third, I want guaranteed visitation rights with Sophie, including overnight stays once the apartment is properly finished. And finally, I want family counseling. All of us, including Sophie. We need to address the damage that's been done and find a way forward, if not as a harmonious family, then at least as respectful co-inhabitants of adjacent spaces. Judge Baxter looked impressed. Those seem like reasonable terms given the circumstances. Certainly more generous than pursuing criminal charges, which the evidence suggests would be justified. James finally looked up, meeting my eyes for the first time. Mom, I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen. The trading started small, just trying to build some extra savings. Then I had some losses, and I was sure I could recover them with just a few more trades. It spiraled so fast. And the room conversion? The suitcases on the sidewalk, I pressed. That was my idea, Allison admitted, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. I was angry, resentful. I felt like our family was being taken over, like Sophie was being turned against me. It was childish and cruel. I see that now. Their attorney conferred with them briefly before addressing the room. My clients are amenable to these terms in principle, though we'll need to work out the details of the repayment plan and the garage conversion. Marian immediately began outlining a framework. A formal appraisal of the garage apartment's potential value, a timeline for necessary improvements, a structured repayment plan secured against their home equity, and a visitation schedule. For Sophie. By early afternoon, we had the bones of an agreement. Not perfect, not what I had envisioned when I sold my home to move closer to my family, but a workable solution that protected my interests while allowing for the possibility of healing. As we prepared to leave, Sophie texted me. How did it go? Can I see you? I showed the message to James and Allison. May I have dinner with her tonight, just at a restaurant nearby, nothing elaborate. They exchanged glances before James nodded. That would be fine. She's been worried about you. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a step toward whatever new reality we would build from the ashes of broken trust. 6 months can change everything or nothing at all. In my case, it transformed a betrayal into a beginning. The garage apartment, once a bare-bones afterthought, has become my sanctuary. James hired contractors who added proper insulation, updated the wiring, installed real kitchen appliances, and even built a small deck outside my door where I can sit and watch the sunset. The space is modest, but completely mine. Legally mine, with a separate entrance and privacy I've come to cherish. The legal paperwork Marian helped create protects me in ways I never imagined needing protection from my own family. The apartment is in my name, with a life estate that cannot be revoked. The repayment plan for my stolen funds is secured against James and Allison's home equity, ensuring they cannot sell or refinance without satisfying their debt to me first. My new bank accounts are solely in my name, with Eleanor as my designated financial advocate should I become unable to manage them myself. The boundaries with James and Allison remain careful, deliberate. We are not the warm, enmeshed family I had imagined when selling my home, but we are finding a new equilibrium. They respect my space. I respect theirs. We exchange pleasantries when we cross paths in the driveway. Sometimes these exchanges even feel genuine. James has joined Gamblers Anonymous and is seeing a therapist for the addiction he finally acknowledged. The program requires making amends to those harmed by his behavior, which led to a difficult but necessary conversation between us. I listened as he explained the progressive grip of his addiction, the shame that prevented him from seeking help, the fear that drove him to desperate measures. I didn't absolve him, but I did begin to understand him. Allison and I maintain a more distant relationship, civil but rarely warm. The family counseling sessions revealed depths of her insecurity. I hadn't recognized jealousies and fears that had festered beneath her polished exterior. She admitted that watching Sophie's adoration of me had triggered memories of her own difficult relationship with her mother, awakening old wounds she thought long healed. I became the villain in my own home, she said, during one particularly raw session. Sophie looking at me like I was a monster after what we did to you. James avoiding me. You judging me. I created exactly what I feared most. Understanding doesn't erase consequences, but it does make them easier to bear. We will likely never be close, Allison and I, but we have reached a state of peaceful coexistence that serves our shared priority, Sophie's well-being. And Sophie, my bright, perceptive granddaughter, has been both the bridge and the beneficiary of our fragile peace. Our relationship has deepened through weekly dinners at my apartment and regular overnight stays on weekends. I teach her to bake using Frank's old recipes. She teaches me how to use social media apps she insists I need. We read the same books and discuss them like members of our own private club. "You're different now, Grandma," she observed recently as we kneaded bread dough together. "Stronger." Different, how I asked, curious about how my transformation appeared through her young eyes. "Before you were always trying to make Mom and Dad happy, like you were afraid they wouldn't want you around. Now you just are who you are. It's better." Out of the mouths of babes, as they say. She was right. The woman who had moved into her son's home, eager to please and terrified of causing waves, had disappeared along with the suitcases on the sidewalk. In her place stood someone more resolute, more clear-eyed, about both her worth and her rights. This transformation extended beyond my immediate family. I joined a support group at the senior center for elderly people who had experienced family estrangement or financial exploitation. Initially seeking help, I soon found myself offering it, sharing my story and the legal steps I had taken to protect myself. The group expanded, then formalized into an official program with volunteer attorneys providing free consultations. We called it Standing Ground, and watching members move from shame and victimhood to empowerment became one of my greatest joys. Through this work, I met Walter, a 72-year-old former accountant, whose daughter had convinced him to sign over his house before placing him in a substandard nursing home. With our group's support, he recovered his property and now lives independently again, occasionally joining me for coffee on my little deck. "I never thought I'd have friends again," after what happened, he told me during one such visit. "The shame was too great. Who wants to admit their own child took advantage of them? The shame belongs to them, not us," I replied, a lesson it had taken me months to truly believe. Life isn't perfect. My savings are still being gradually repaid. I sometimes lie awake remembering the sight of my suitcases on that rain-soaked sidewalk. There are family gatherings where the conversation grows strained, old hurts rising to the surface like bruises that haven't fully healed. But there is also this my own space decorated with the items I chose to keep from my life with Frank. Financial security hard-won but now carefully protected. A relationship with my granddaughter that flourishes in its new configuration, purpose, and community through the Standing Ground program. And perhaps most importantly, a sense of my own resilience that I never knew I possessed. Sometimes those who should love you most can hurt you deepest, but your value isn't determined by their treatment. Real strength is knowing when to fight, when to forgive, and how to rebuild without bitterness. I learned this lesson late in life, but perhaps that makes it all the more precious. Last week I hosted Sophie's 13th birthday party in my apartment. Her friends crowded around the kitchen island as I taught them to make pizza from scratch. James and Allison came for cake at the end, bringing a gift we had discussed and agreed upon together. As I watched Sophie blow out her candles surrounded by people who love her in their complicated, imperfect ways, I felt something that had been missing since that rainy day 6 months ago. Peace. Not the peace of perfect resolution, but the deeper peace that comes from standing in your truth and rebuilding on a foundation of self-respect. It's a lesson I hope Sophie carries forward long after the memory of suitcases on a sidewalk has faded. Have you ever had to rebuild your life after betrayal? How did you find the strength to stand up for yourself while still leaving room for healing? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if you found value in my journey, please like this video and subscribe to hear more stories of resilience and renewal. Remember, it's never too late to reclaim your worth and rebuild your life on your own terms. Thank you for listening, and may you find both justice and peace in your own journey.